sinners and saints. Dust off those horns and halos. It's time for Alan After Dark.
Sinners and saints, here we are in the middle of the spooky season, and this is the final Halloween episode for Alan After Dark this year, and I know you all are so happy about that. Before we get on with this week's episode, I hope you're feeling well and sexy and pussy and dicky and wicky and licky and fingery, whatever is floating your boat this week. I hope you're indulging in all the things that you want to indulge in. I gotta say that it's been a very interesting day just today. I've been thinking about what I want this episode to really be about that coincides, of course, with Halloween. And as you've seen the title, it seems like maybe there are forces at work that are trying to prevent me from actually even recording this episode. I've had technical problems all day, and finally, here we are recording. Hopefully, it's going to sound okay, but it just seems like maybe the title of this episode is reflecting in real time what it's going to be about. I find it almost impossible to believe, but it was this week, 6 years ago, that my career with a very large international company came to an end. They opted to outsource all the jobs, well, almost all the jobs, overseas. The department had about 80 people. I was the manager at the time that I left. I sort of jumped ship before the final days would come. I didn't want to stay to the end. I was provided another job opportunity that I really couldn't afford to pass on. So after well over a decade with a company that I loved and people that I loved, I moved on. When I left, it really did end an entire novel's worth of my life at a place that it really did feel like, for some reason, we were cursed. And I know it sounds silly for me to say that, but I want us to take a trip back in time so that I can tell you about my experience there and why we felt that working there, we seem to have been cursed. When I went to work for this company, I really was at a low point. I was leaving a company that was treating me like garbage. I was underpaid, and I was desperate for a job that would be long-term. I wanted to be with a very stable company, and I really am a person of structure, and I really did want to work for a company until retirement. I had no desire to make changes. If the company was good to me, I would be good to it. And that's what I thought I had landed with this company when I started. When I began working there, my first position, my responsibilities was basically data entry, handling things on the accounting side. I eventually became a team lead over several people and then went on to become a manager. But it was a little bit of a bumpy road to get to that point. And there were, of course, like any job, no matter how much you love it, you have bad days and sometimes bad weeks, even bad months. But this job was stable, long-term, and it was just one less thing that I had to worry about as far as money coming in to take care of my rent, my utilities, my food, etc. It didn't take me very long to get a handle on the job and get my groove on and start expanding my position. I had, made friends, and the boss, he was determined, he said, to make it really like a family environment. He wanted us to not only work together, but really enjoy each other's company outside of work. Over the years, of course, I've told you all before that I benefited from travel. I got to go to China, to Australia, to Africa, to Europe, to many places that I would never get to go if I hadn't had this position. And when you travel like that and you travel with certain people, you really do bond with them. And it is like family. It only becomes unfortunate when the company reminds you that no, it's actually a business, and when the company is done with you, you're out the door. One of the first instances that I can recall was the boss. I become team lead, and he always had this routine of coming and saying good morning to almost everyone. And I noticed one day that he appeared to be swelling. His face and head seemed to be swollen. And I finally, one day, it's not something you necessarily bring up, but I thought we were close enough. I just asked him one day, I'm like, hey, you're really swelling. Are you okay? And he said, the doctors can't seem to figure it out. They're going to send me to a dermatologist. And I was like, a dermatologist? You are swelling. It doesn't look like something wrong with your skin. But he was still trying to figure out what was going on, and he was going to every doctor his doctor recommended. Well, one morning, oh, by the way, I'm almost always one of the first ones in the office. So one morning, his wife called me at the office and said, hey, I need to take him to the hospital. We think he's having a heart attack. Which hospital should I take him to? And I was like, well, the one down from where you live should be fine. I think they take our insurance there, so you should be okay. So at the ER at this hospital, the emergency room, the doctor on staff was examining him and said, I don't think you're having a heart attack and you have this swelling. He said, let's just do a chest x-ray. And they did the x-ray and they found cancer, inoperable cancer in his chest, squeezing like the main artery that pumps blood throughout the body, which explained his swelling. He was going to be treated with, chemotherapy, radiation, and so on. But for a long time, we thought he wasn't going to survive. He was in really bad shape. The treatments really took a lot out of him. He lost massive amounts of weight. All of his hair fell out. Even his eyelashes, if I recall correctly, fell out. And I know what you're saying. Well, that's one person and people get cancer. Well, how about 5 people getting cancer? Let's call her Laura. Laura was one of the sweetest women I've ever met in my life. She worked hard. She was so polite. And she had this little quirky thing she did with me. She was a great cook. And she would make things and she would bring them into the office for me to try. But she wouldn't tell me what it was until after I ate it. And then she would always surprise me with all these very exotic, unusual things that were all very good. Well, her position there, she had to do a lot of research, digging up old records and things. And we had this section in the building that was in a basement that she would have to go through and dig out these records. Sometimes she would be down there, sometimes as long as 6 hours in a given day. All I remember is that one Friday midday, I saw her at her desk, and she seemed to be gathering up stuff, like personal items and things, and she was gone. I thought, well, what happened there? Well, it turned out that she had been diagnosed with lung cancer, and her husband swore that he thought it was from her inhaling something from that basement area where she spent so much time. She wasn't a smoker. She was very health conscious. She wasn't overweight. Ironically, she went into remission, but they had to perform an emergency surgery for something, and she wound up dying during the surgery. Another person, we'll call her Kay. She was diagnosed with lung cancer at the very precise moment, the earliest point she could have been. and she went through treatment and chemo, surgery, and she survived. But she has now, at this point, passed away. Not from that, just, age and other problems. We had two others with colon cancer. Both were treated and have survived and are still living their best lives today. We also have several others from different departments, but one that stands out to me the most, and we'll call her Darla. She was just a precious woman who fought and fought and fought her cancer and beat it every time, only to die waiting for a heart transplant because all the treatment basically destroyed her heart. That's just one portion of what I'm talking about with this company, our department. We had a woman one day. She was an older woman, and she has passed away as well now. She was walking to the parking lot. She was carrying a glass vase, and for some reason that day, she didn't take the steps up to the parking lot. She was walking up the grass embankment. Well, she fell with the vase, and the vase shattered when she fell on top of it. A couple of people saw her. They rushed her back into the office, and she was bleeding, and they had to call paramedics, and they could not figure out where this blood was coming from, but she was pouring out blood, and it had turned out the broken vase, the glass had cut a sizable gash underneath her breast, and she was really pouring out the blood. She had hit her chin against part of the concrete sidewalk, and she was actually going to try to drive home, but wound up going to the hospital to get treated because the bleeding would not stop, and they had to stitch her up. As all of this was going on, I started having my own health problem. It just seemed like all of a sudden I was having trouble swallowing food. For some reason, sometimes it would go down, sometimes I would get choked, and as this condition progressed, I began coughing up uneaten food. I wasn't throwing it up. It wasn't getting to my stomach at all. I was also working out 6 to 7 times a week, almost every day at the gym, getting myself in shape, lifting weights, cardio. So with whatever was wrong with me that I didn't understand and my working out, I was really starting to lose weight. In fact, I was losing so much weight that people referred to me sometimes as a skeleton. And one time, someone just casually asked me, "Do you have cancer?" Now, I'd gone to my doctor, my standard physicals, and I would say, I feel like there's something wrong. I seem to be having trouble swallowing food. My doctor did order special tests, and they ran, not to get too specific and too technical, they ran a scope down my throat to my stomach to see if they could see what was wrong. And basically, the results were there was some scar tissue, and they expanded my esophagus a little bit, but it did not detect anything wrong. Meanwhile, another coworker, let's call her Teresa, she was suddenly missing for like 3 days out. She had said with pneumonia or something like that, but when she came back, she revealed to other coworkers who were female that she had been beaten up by her husband. She had bruises and scars and all over her body, it seemed, and she was severely hurt, and she spent time in the hospital. And it seemed that the abuse went on for quite a while, and she wound up missing more days. Well, she wound up missing so much that she was let go. After she had left, she was out with the husband at his little music beer joint kind of thing, and he actually punched her in public in front of other people, obviously. She goes to her car, comes back with a gun, and shoots him dead. She is acquitted of murder, manslaughter. It was ruled self-defense because of all the abuse she had taken, and there were plenty of witnesses to testify that he had punched her and that they knew the abuse had been going on for quite a while. It was later we found out that she was busted in a meth raid at some point and have no clue what happened to her. We had a tragic incident where one of our employees, let's call her We'll call her Kelly. Kelly had just had her baby. She had been on a 6-week leave. And, gosh, this is hard to really talk about. She wound up having a brain aneurysm in the office where she fell dead to the floor. There was a 4th of July celebration in the town where our office was. I didn't attend things there, but a lot of people did. And we'll call her Deborah. Deborah's family went to this celebration for 4th of July, Independence Day. And she had her daughter, her son-in-law, and their child was with them. And, it's just one of those things where you have music and you have booths and you have food and you're waiting for it to get dark for fireworks. Well, there was a man, an elderly man, who got into his truck and accidentally put it in reverse instead of forward and lost control of the vehicle. Deborah's son-in-law, in order to save his daughter, tossed her out of the way and was run over and killed. As all this was happening, my health condition seemed to get worse. And finally, my doctor was able to order a test called a barium swallow test and an ultrasound that actually found the problem. And I was so relieved because I thought I was going crazy. I thought that I made this all up in my mind and I was having symptoms because I mentally was making myself have symptoms. But I was diagnosed with a Zinker's diverticulum, which is sort of like a pouch that forms outside the esophagus. And mine was one of the largest they'd ever seen. So I had to have invasive surgery to repair it. My doctor, after that was over, he did apologize, and he said that people of your age don't usually have those. It usually happens to people in their 70s and 80s, and you're by far younger, so we would have never anticipated that being a problem for you. But I just told him, well, now you know somebody my age can have something like that. And I was just lucky because it had gone on for years and was getting worse, and it could have led to really bad infections. I could have really had a serious health problem if they had not diagnosed it and I had surgery to repair it. My surgeon, she did a fantastic job, but I still have a bit of a scar on my neck that I really was dreading it. I just thought it would be such an eyesore, but now you can barely see it. And I sometimes use it as a measure of my coolness. Some people might think that I was in a bad fight and somebody tried to slit my throat. Yeah, I'm going to really be in a fight like that. Jesus. When I became manager, our boss hired a guy to be manager over expense reports. And let's call him Eddie. He became one of my best friends. He was just a fantastic guy. I knew he was gay. He knew I was gay, but we didn't mention it at first. And we had mutual friends. And finally, he came out to happy hour one night, and he and I obviously just hit it off. We had the bond of being gay and also working at the same company. And he was just a great guy. He was having, issues within his life, like all of us do, normal things that go on. But he also had some health problems that he really didn't talk about much. And I'll just never get over it. He was on a business trip that I didn't want to go on. I'd been on so many that year that I just begged the boss, can you not pick someone else? And so he wanted to go, and it was to South Africa. And that's a long, long trip. That's a long flight back and forth. But he enjoyed it. He went on a safari when he was there. He really did have a good time. Well, 2 weeks later, on a Friday morning, he was gone. He was dead. He was out with some friends that I didn't really know that well. Overnight, something went wrong. He had stopped breathing, and he was taken to the hospital, and they could not revive him. Now, from what I was told, there was a blood clot that went to his lung that subsequently caused a heart attack, which he did not survive. They were never able to prove it because he had blood clots before, but I worried that it was because of that trip and the long flight that maybe it affected him and caused him to have a blood clot, because that kind of thing can happen sometimes. So I did carry the guilt for a little while, but you have to let that go. But I still miss him to this day. It was just a shock that morning seeing him on that table at the hospital, gone. Just a shell, a body. Eddie died the Friday before the Thanksgiving holiday, the same year that Mama Jean died. So that wasn't a very good year for me and a lot of my friends. We lost some really good people that year. But once again, it felt like, how much more can people who work for this company go through? Well, fasten your seatbelts, because we're getting ready to talk about two of the worst incidents that have ever happened to us, those of us who worked at that company. I just told you guys about one of my best friends, Eddie, and how he died the Friday before Thanksgiving. Well, this next incident, which is horrific, graphic, and traumatizing, occurred on the Friday after Thanksgiving. And I will obviously not use the real names, and I won't provide many of the graphic details. But if you do have a weak stomach or are afraid of being triggered, you might want to skip the next few minutes here. We'll call her Linda. Linda had worked for the company for a few years, and she had decided to leave the company. Her and her husband were moving back to their old hometown to be near family and basically start her retirement. Her going away party was scheduled for the Monday after the Thanksgiving holiday. Well, immediately it was really concerning that she did not show up for work. She had not called her boss, and nobody had heard from her. Everybody tried to contact her through calling, through texting, and there were no responses. Finally, they decided to contact the police to do a welfare check because they were just very concerned that she was not there, especially since it was her going away party. The police do a really quick, welfare check, and they call back and say, well, nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. We didn't see anything that looked wrong, and so that seemed to be it. Well, we called back again and insisted that something had to be wrong because no one had heard from her or her husband. Nobody had been able to get in touch with them. Something had to be wrong. Obviously, there was something horrifically wrong. We were waiting to hear back, didn't really know anything for a while, and it was close to lunchtime. I was in my office, and I'll just say this. Linda's manager, that team manager, she and I did not get along. We did not like each other, and it was pretty obvious from everyone. Nobody had any doubts how we felt about each other. So I'm working at my desk, and I've already been back from lunch, and most people were out having lunch, still wondering what was going on. Our offices, we not only do we have a door, of course, but we had a full-length window so that you could see out. And you know how when you're working or something or just anywhere and you can feel like someone is looking at you? I turn and look, and it's Linda's manager, this person I don't get along with. And she's standing there, and I can see tears in her eyes. And I'm like, oh my gosh, and I wave her in, and she closes the door. And she sits down and she says, the police found Linda and her husband at the house, chopped in pieces. It turned out that part of their Thanksgiving holiday, where they had a lot of the family in including their son from Louisiana, that they were going to tell him that he needed to make it on his own, that the money was going to be cut off. They were going to move back home to their hometown, and he needed to make his own way. Well, he wasn't about to do that, so he decided to murder them, thinking he could get away with it. He did not get away with it. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. He'll never be out of prison. He cannot get parole. He was a psychopathic monster that killed his parents in the most brutal of ways. Like I said way back at the beginning, our boss had tried to cultivate this feeling of family, which did work. And as I also said, that it was 6 years ago this week, I changed careers. The last incident I want to talk about really does stem from the months prior to me leaving that company. So the company, which is still successful today, I have to admit, back then they were transitioning. We had a new CEO, a new CFO coming in, and they were making the rounds. They were visiting a lot of the bigger locations, and we were considered corporate at our location for our department. We were, and we were global. We were the global center for what we did for the company. So the CFO, who is technically our boss, he is the main boss over our boss. And I think I just said that stupidly, but I think you understand what I mean. So he comes in for a visit, and he gathers the whole department together in the big conference room. And while I don't remember a whole lot of what he said, one part of it really stands out. What he said was, he said, "You guys are the glue of this company." And he intertwined his fingers together to show that we were the glue. And then he says, "We need you to not be the glue anymore." And immediately we all knew that he meant these jobs were going to be eliminated. And it really turned the department, our office, upside down. People were upset, were angry. And I remember talking to you guys about it before when I was confronting my boss about things. And he said, "Alan, it's just a job." And my reply to him was, "You have some nerve after all these years saying that you wanted to cultivate a family environment, and now you say it's just a job." Now, I get it. You're just trying to save your own job, and you're willing to sacrifice hours to save yours. I get it. But don't say it's just a job when we've spent well over a decade creating this environment where we were family and friends, and we had fun, and there was joy and sorrow and loss, and we grieved like a family does when things went bad, when things went wrong. In the repercussions of the CFO's comments and the reality of the company eliminating our positions to send them overseas, we all had to start thinking about strategies. What are we going to do? They did offer severance packages for people to stay on for a little bit longer, help with a transition. And let's call her Joanne. Joanne and I started work at the same time at that company. I think we're within 1 week of each other, maybe 2. We had gotten to know each other all these years, and we wound up traveling a lot together to different places. She wasn't the easiest person to get to know, and she was very much driven by her career. She loved her job, and she loved working, and she would travel anywhere in the world that our boss would ask her to. In this chaotic transition, they all knew that I was actively applying, sending my resume, getting in touch with contacts and things to help me find something new. Joanne came into my office one day, and we were talking, and she wanted to ask me if she could use me as a reference. And I said, "Well, of course you can." And she says, "Alan, if they call, you've got to tell them the truth about my personality." And I'm like, "Joanne, I know. You have that twofold kind of personality where you come off a little gruff, but you have a heart of gold, and you're nice, and you will help anybody that needs it." And I said to her, "You don't have to worry. They're not going to eliminate your job. You are too valuable to the company. You're beyond just our department. You help with everything connected to the financial system. they will not eliminate you. And she said, well, if we were gone, it might slow down this process. Maybe it'll save some jobs and give people more time to find a new one. And I really wish I had understood what she might have been implying there, because there was more to what she was saying than I picked up on. At least in my heart of hearts, that's what I think. So fast forward a couple of weeks later, it's a Monday morning, and there's a sense that something is wrong. And I can see it in my boss's eyes and Joanne's sort of manager, even though Joanne was kind of on her own and sort of directly reported to our boss. But I could see it in their eyes. They said, well, she's not here. We haven't heard from her. So we need to go check on her at her house, which was just down the road. That's how dedicated she was. She even bought a house just a few blocks away from our office. That's how driven she was to maintain her career with this company. So they're going, and I don't even think anything of it at the moment. I was a little concerned that maybe she's sick or something and hasn't been able to contact us or anybody. Well, it turns out that she had decided to take her own life the night before. It's the fire department that finds her body on her bed, everything planned out, calculated, no mess. And that was Joanne for you. She's very efficient with everything. It just tore the company up. She was so valued by so many around the world. Everybody was in shock. I just mentioned a few minutes ago how my boss said, it's just a job. Well, in the days following Joanne's suicide, he and I were talking, and he just said to me, he said, do you think it was the job? Is that the reason why she might have done this, that she was afraid of losing her job? And I'm like, absolutely, that's what it was. This meant everything to her. And she had said to me what she said about, if we were gone, maybe it would slow down this process and it might save some other people's jobs. And I never picked up on that maybe she meant if she was gone, if she took her own life, that's what she meant by that she was trying to come up with something to save other people's jobs. But in telling my boss, yes, I thought that's what it was, is that she couldn't bear the thought of losing her job here, and suicide was her only option, which is devastating to me. That was the catalyst for me to leave. And I made a vow right there, never ever to treat a job as the most important thing in my life. I tell myself now, even with the job that I have and all the things that I'm doing in my career in other aspects, it is just a job. And I don't want to be family with people that I work with. We get along. We're friends, okay? I don't hang out with them after work. I don't want to. I've already went through all that. So I have my friends outside of work, and I have work. And that's just one aspect of my life. But to think that you valued yourself only based on your career just really does hurt, doesn't it? It bothers me, and I hope it bothers everyone to a degree. I think everyone should take pride in their work, should do a good job, and really make that job your own. But it isn't the world. It isn't what always defines you. Your character, your relationships, those things are more defining, I think, than your job. I know that you all have heard the urban legends of the movie Poltergeist and the curse of Poltergeist. Maybe the television show Different Strokes, that there was a curse there. And I found that interesting because of all the things that happened to the actors. And I've just laid out a large portion of things that happened to us at this company. I didn't even have time to get into the SWAT team entering the building, the woman with the knife, the cubicle fire that could have burnt the whole building down. I mean, really. But I'll leave it up to you guys, whether or not you think that potentially we had some sort of curse. You cannot deny that we had a lot of horrific and terrible things happen. And I am technically just scratching the surface. I covered the most horrific parts to kind of prove the point that we had unusual things happen at that company that not everybody can say has happened wherever they've worked. So having said that, I'll leave it to you guys to decide whether it's just a series of bad things that happened or is there a potential curse. I will leave this with you. The Saturday after my last day with that company, I was going to start my new job that Monday. That Saturday night, I was rear-ended in a terrible car accident. I was hit so hard that my car was pushed into the vehicle in front of mine so that my car was totaled. I was uninjured, but sitting there on the side of the road, waiting for some friends to come pick me up, I was like, really, company? Was this your last dig at me before I start a new job? I really thought it was trying to have the last laugh. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Alan After Dark. Have a happy Halloween filled with chills and thrills and sex if you want it, I guess. Remember, take life by the balls and be real. We'll see you soon.